Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy. In a moment, our guest tonight will be Dr. Richard Boylan. We're going to be talking with some incredible theories here about star visitors, star child, and seeding of star adults. What does this all mean? No, we're not talking about Hollywood stars. Dr. Richard Boylan, Ph.D. type, is a behavioral scientist, anthropologist, university associate professor emeritus, certified clinical hypnotherapist, a consultant, and researcher. Ooh. His career has also spanned 4 decades as a service as a psychologist, social worker, a retired clergyman, educator, and space anthropologist. Dr. Boylan is a consultant to star kids and star seeds seeking to understand their origin, identity, and mission. Author of 3 books, Close Extraterrestrial Encounters, Labored Journey to the Stars, and Project Epiphany. He is also the president of the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists, a not-for-profit educational and research organization. Richard, when do you sleep, for crying out loud? You're everywhere.
Well, tonight it won't be till 2 in the morning. George, how are you?
Good to talk to you. Good to, I met you at a conference about a year or so ago, right toward the end, and it was a pleasure doing that as well. Tell me, what have you been doing since we last talked a few years ago?
Well, I've been continuing to work with the star kids and star seed adults. For any listeners to whom those terms are not self-evident, let me say real quickly that these are people who've been transformed by connection with the star visitors. The 2 main ways people get transformed is either their parents are visited and some reproductive material is genetically upgraded, and when they are born, they are more advanced, brighter, have a double handfuls of psychic abilities, generally are more robust, and have a pretty strong cosmic awareness. And these kids and adults are now in very great numbers in society and are beginning to make an impact as we transform our society from the kind of scary one world New World Order orientation that you've been talking about to take it in a new and healthier direction. And they're going to put a lot of muscle and brain power and even psychic abilities to that task. So we've been doing workshops and talks and meeting with kids and grown-ups and trying to raise consciousness. I've got a new book out since that listing got printed. Star Kids is the name of it, and it talks all about them, and, of course, writing that has consumed much of the last year.
Now, when you talk about there are many of these children on the planet, how many are we talking about, if you could estimate for us?
Well, yes, I've done some research sampling technique, and the results are, to put it mildly, astounding. Let me give you some global figures, because this is a worldwide phenomenon, and the numbers are just going to dazzle people. It's my estimate now that, the UN tells us there's 6.3 billion humans alive today. And in my estimates, 59% of them are star kids or star seed adults. Now, that doesn't mean they're all awake yet. Many people know they're different. They feel different. They can't quite put their finger on it. They know they have unusual abilities that nobody talks about in the newspapers or on television, but in many cases they are aware of contact, telepathic or in person with star visitors, but they're in the closet, or maybe they haven't even had contact and they're just walking around knowing they're a little bit different but not clear why. But when all of these people wake up as this phenomenon comes out in the open and starts to get on the broad general media, these people are going to really snap to and realize why they're different, why they're here. And really get mobilized to make a difference in our society.
How do they look, Richard? Though, do they look like human beings, or do they look a little different?
No, these kids and adults pretty much look like general humans. You wouldn't, in most cases, be able to pick them out of the population as looking much differently. They, in some cases, tend to have a little larger head development, particularly in the front or the top, and these are areas of intelligence and psychic dominance in the brain structure. Some of them have kind of a little bit different eye structure in terms of the iris, but mostly they do not look different on the outside. A couple of the physical telltale signs are very often they have lower body temperature than the average a regular human of yore. You know, the old fever thermometer says it should read 98.6 if you're
right.
normal. These kids and starseed adults tend to read a degree or two lower. I've had a physiologist tell me, actually, that's kind of good. It means you're not burning up as fast and you'll last longer. And indeed, many of these kids grow up fast as infants and small children, faster than their peers, but as they get to the other end of their lifespan, they tend to look younger than the folks around them their age that are aging, and tend to last longer. So it seems like a good deal all in all.
Now, if your estimate is correct, Richard, 59% of the children and adults on this planet may be these star children, star adults. That means to me that this campaign has been going on for a long, long time. Has it?
And let me say yes, and we'll talk a second about the length of that, but let me mention the other dimension of how star kids and starseeds happen besides the gene splicing, upgrading. The other major, in fact, in my research with, I probably worked with 500 people now have had contact, and many starseed star kids. If anything, the more predominant way this happens is that an individual who was a star visitor, an extraterrestrial, if you will, in a previous lifetime comes in as a human this time, but brings along with them just enough kind of elevated consciousness and awareness and energy and extra abilities that they function at a higher level than a regular human would have. So the combination of these star visitor incarnates, if you will, that are now walking around as humans and humans who've been genetically upgraded does constitute the 59%. But because they often come in with no particular awareness from before, they have to be, in most cases, reached out to and explained why they're different, and then everything clicks together and starts to make some sense, and they understand themselves.
How did this...
This has been going on for... well, we can talk about isolated instances going back into the last century, but the real tidal wave of star kids started happening in the 80s and 90s. By that I mean the percentages really got to be really astounding. We can talk in terms of, well, let me give you a little age breakout here.
All right.
I think it kind of makes the case for what's going on. If you take the middle, young, mature adults, 30 to 45, about 45% of them are starseed adults.
Okay.
So that's back 30 years that there was a sizable percentage.
Mm-hmm.
You get down to the young adults, the 19 to 29 crowd, two-thirds of those are starseeds. You get down to the teenagers, 8 out of 10 are star kids. You get down to the kids who are infants to 12 years of age, 96% are star kids. So what we've got is a front-end loaded wave that the closer you get to the present, the higher percentage of people coming in and being born are star seeds or star kids. So while there were some back in the 50s and even before then, and isolated individuals going back, Einstein was one, and Tesla, going back even into the wraparound of the late 1800s. But the real wave is in the last few decades, and it has now created a majority of humanity in this column, if you will.
Is one select group of extraterrestrials responsible for this, or a number of them?
Well, it is a project of the Star Nations, which is the unified organization of all the intelligent civilizations in contact with Earth. They talk about a primary mission objective to Earth, which is to save Earth, which is headed to hell in a handbasket, as any environmental scientist will tell you, but also the species upon it, the plants, the animals, fish, birds, but very centrally the humans. As fellow conscious intelligence beings, they hate to see intelligent species blow itself up or destroy its ability to survive on a planet. So their focus is on trying to turn around this madcap race to hell in a handbasket that our current society and culture is on, between environmental degradation, violence, wars, weapons of mass destruction, and New World Order kind of repression and manipulating conflicts everywhere to maintain dominance. They want us to reach our highest and best potential, what the indigenous people of many cultures have called Fifth World, a place where humans live in peace and harmony with the earth and with each other, and operate in a more family-like way instead of at each other's throats in a competitive, materialistic dominance paradigm that we find ourselves in currently. So they are here with both the incoming wave of volunteers volunteering to come as a human this time around and live a lifetime, and in terms of the genetic upgrading work. The heavy lifters in terms of the workforce are primarily the Zeta folks, but it's not a Zeta project. It's a whole Star Nation project. They're just the ones that are doing the intensive labor of most of the contacting and the gene splicing.
Richard, this Project Serpo, have you heard of it?
Serpo?
Yeah.
I've heard of it.
This is supposed to have been some kind of a basically trade program between astronauts and extraterrestrials that started in 1965 and lasted about 13 years. But they mentioned Zeta Reticuli. It's very similar, I think, to some of the things you've talked about. I'm wondering if there's definitively been that kind of relationship. But my question to you is how do you know this has been going on, this either genetic altering or this transformation?
Well, I'll tell you, I've got a database of 500 cases, and many of the other therapists I associate with who are in our association, the Society of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists, have reached the same conclusion through interviews with people, and in some cases by hypnotic regression, taking people back to encounter incidents or even back to the beginning of their life and back to the in-between space between this life and a previous life. People have reported out being aware of previous existence on another planet as looking quite different than they do as a human now, and in many cases consciously recalling that they have been presented with the perilous Earth situation and consciously volunteered to come in and live a human life and try and help and make a contribution here.
What's the percent of the genetically altered humans to those that either come through via reincarnation or these other dimensions you were talking about? Is there a breakdown on that?
I don't have a firm figure. I can give you a kind of feel from dealing with many people and kind of making a rough estimate. I would say the majority of star seeds and star kids are through the incarnation route, being star visitors before and coming in as a human this time. A minority, but still a pretty hefty minority, are those that have their parents' reproductive material is genetically upgraded, and they come in genetically upgraded as a more fully developed human with these mental and psychic abilities and so forth.
How are they doing it, Richard, without the rest of the population, those people who haven't been affected, of them knowing about it? I mean, do they do it with craft and they beam people aboard? What's the procedure?
Well, ever so many of the encounters people have had have a dimension of the person being taken aboard a craft and their reproductive material worked with, this genetic gene splicing, I guess we would consider it, and then brought back, and when they go on to have a kid, they have a much more advanced kid. This is happening all over the world. The star visitors and the Zetas certainly have mastered the ability of low profile, coming in with cloak craft, picking usually quiet times of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning. Person isn't gone very long, and in many cases there's a hypnotic suggestion they won't remember the encounter until a later and better time when they're ready to deal with the information. And the star visitors, the Zeta, has been very busy over many years, and so there is a very generous sprinkling of these star seeds and star kids all over the planet. Of course, you get to a certain point, as you know, in genetics, where once this upgraded genome is installed in a person, if you will, they then are in a position to pass that on to their kids. The Zetas don't have to come back every generation and do splicing. The new upgraded version of humankind is passed on. It's George Robinson, professor, who gave the keynote talk at the When Cosmic Cultures Meet conference in Washington, D.C. in 1995 that I was at, really brought the room to a hush when he defined the new human that is emerging now. He coined a term which I really like. He called, instead of Homo sapiens sapiens, he said Homo Alterius Spatialis, meaning man that is different and space-oriented.
Dr. Boylan, a couple weeks ago, you kicked up quite a stir on the internet with a report about some super secret 1960-ish type meetings, and I want you to explain that because it is a mind-boggling story.
It is indeed. I just about flipped when I got this information given to me, and it puts a lot of pieces of the puzzle together, and it also, I got it down to the level of detail, as including who were at this meeting, some of the key people, and when you talk about New World Order, we begin to have some of the people ID'd and begin to see how far back it goes. Basically, there were 2 meetings that I'm going to talk about, one in 1961 and one in 1964. Both of these were meetings between representatives from 4 governments of Earth and representatives from the Star Nations, the High Council of the Star Nations, the governing body. let's start with the 1961 preliminary meeting.
Okay.
After about 4 years of private contacts by Star Nation representatives with individual leaders of governments, the four governments being the United States, the Soviet Union, People's Republic of China, and the Council of Europe. So from 57 to 61, Star Nation's representatives made individual contacts with the leaders of these governments, and the point was to get together to create a joint meeting to get some policy agreements hammered out that would achieve a couple things that the Star Nations definitely wanted, which is to stop the attacks of these governments on Star Nation craft that were passing through the sky, and also to permit the Star Nations to continue their mission here, protective and transformative mission, without being attacked. President Dwight Eisenhower agreed to a preliminary meeting, and by 1960, the leaders of all four countries agreed that they would have representatives ready to go in December 12, 1961. The meeting place was London, the Duchess Palace, the Grand Ballroom. December 12, 61, 26 representatives from the four Earth governments of these particular governments, and three counselors from the Star Nations High Council, along with a four-person Zetas security contingent and a recording secretary, if you will.
Now, let me ask you, what did they look like, these extraterrestrials, Richard? Because,
right.
I mean, could they just waltz into a hotel unnoticed?
Well, I don't think we're talking about waltzing in. This meeting was under extreme wraps, of course, and everybody who went there, I'm sure, was under high security and the kind of thing where you pull in a limo with darkened windows, and people don't know who's coming in and assembling. I would imagine, given the security of this situation and the kind of security they had for the subsequent meeting, that the place is probably cleaned out for this meeting. The Star Nation counselor representatives were a tall Zeta, a praying mantis type person, humanoid. In fact, a council representative for the praying mantis people, as we would call them. They kind of resemble humanoid version of that insect, kind of tall, spindly figures, large eyes, and a Reptoid humanoid counselor representing the Reptoid reptilian human contingent. These were not all the races, but just a representative handful of counselors who came to represent the Star Nations for the purpose of this particular meeting on Earth. And they met with these 26 representatives. If you wish, I can mention who some of the human figures that people would recognize were there.
And you're going to have to tell us how you came across this information, because that, to me, is as equally important as the event itself. But go ahead.
Yes. Well, let me mention who some of the humans were, and then I'll indicate how I got hold of this information. The human representatives were as follows. President David Rockefeller headed the U.S. delegation. Apparently, he had leaned on President Eisenhower and gotten agreement that he would head the U.S. delegation. Newly elected President Kennedy was only in office a few months and was not fully briefed about the meeting, and while he didn't particularly care for the choice of people representing the U.S. He was so newly in and so left in the dark that he couldn't do much about it.
All right.
Representing the Council of Europe was international law professor Anthony Bradley, who's also was a member of the Council of Europe. Representing the Soviet Union was Premier Nikita Khrushchev in person. And representing the Chinese government of Premier Mao Zedong was his most trusted confidant, his official representative, who they went to great difficulty not to divulge his name. Additional people present were Laurance Rockefeller, David's brother, and Henry Kissinger, David's chief advisor. The British Queen Elizabeth II was there. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands was there. E.H. van der Beugel, the Secretary General of the Bilderberg Council, a world policy planning group.
Oh, sure, yeah.
If you like New World Order, just listen in on one of their meetings.
Yeah, really.
Was there as well.
This was a who's who.
The only white hat I could detect out of the people that are identified was someone who was an American but was picked by the Russian and Europeans to be a delegate to this meeting, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, the noted African-American scholar and civil rights activist, a PhD from Harvard, and so forth. He was of quite a different stripe than the rest of the representatives there, who were pretty much under the thumb of the cabal, the New World Order types, if you will, that made sure that their men were pretty much who were the delegates there. But Du Bois was a different stripe. He wanted to bring education between the cultures, and what really got people hostile at him was that he wanted to go public about the fact that star nations were communicating with humans. He did not feel right that the people of the world didn't know about this meeting. But Rockefeller requested, in his gentle way, Du Bois not to speak about the meeting, and told the other representatives they had better not speak about it as well.
Sounds like you obtained the minutes of the meeting, Richard.
Well, not quite.
We'll get to that, though.
The source for this, obviously, is not any of these four governments or anybody on Earth. This thing is beyond super secret classified. Nothing of this has ever come out before, although there are certain circumstantial evidence that dovetail with this very neatly. But the source is the star nations. They are the ones that provided this information and indicated it should become public.
Provided it to whom?
Me.
To you?
Me.
In what fashion did you obtain it? I mean, a direct package, or did it come in the mail from Zeta Reticuli? I mean, seriously, how did you get it?
Telepathic communication and assistance from some colleagues who also are in communication with the star nations to make sure that it is heard properly and fully.
And when did that happen?
It happened just a few days before I went public with this on March 17th.
Okay, so very, very recently.
Very recently. It took me, several days to kind of put a cold compress to my head with this information. It is so mind-boggling. And I haven't even talked about the final meeting yet. But, just a handful of days before I put it on the Internet did it come to me.
Okay, so this incredible group of people, they're meeting, and initially then the discussion is, quit shooting at us. We've got a mission here. What kind of agreement did they all come to?
Well, that is the second meeting, which I'll jump to now.
All right.
The first meeting was basically to set up the agenda and everybody hear what the other side wanted and go back and on an individual basis Star Nation representatives met with individual representatives on the between time. There's a 3-year gap between the December 12, 61 preliminary meeting and the second meeting. Now, the second meeting took place on April 14th, 1964. The location was in the United States, in fact, in Texas, and to be more precise, in the Guadalupe Mountains that run along northwest Texas into the New Mexican border. To be more precise, pretty much underneath El Capitan Peak, the highest point in the Guadalupe Mountains, and to be more precise, about 15 levels down in a subterranean government installation there that nobody talks about. The Guadalupe Mountains National Park is perhaps the national park with the least reason to exist. In fact, even on one of the websites, they complain about there's nothing there when you go there. I think it was, as some government park properties are, designed to protect certain things within them that whether there's any sagebrush or rabbits protected is purely secondary. In this case, the installation was there. So 2 people were not at the second meeting. W.B. Du Bois had died right before the second meeting happened under what the Star Nations tell me are suspicious circumstances. In fact, he was killed, I think, the day before the Civil Rights March of
that should have made the Star Nations group a little suspicious of the rest of the group they were dealing with.
Oh, they knew who they were dealing with. They knew these were a bunch of rascals. It was very distasteful to meet with this group, but they had no choice because their rules said they have to deal with who the humans put forward, and these were the 4 governments that were shooting at them, and the officials designated to speak for these governments, so they had to hold their nose and meet with them. The other person not there was Queen Elizabeth, who apparently didn't have a desire to attend the second meeting. Everyone else was there on both sides, the rest of the human representatives and the Star Nations representatives, and they achieved an agreement that give you the main elements of the. Of course, from the Star Nation side, they wanted a ceasefire, and the 4 governments said, "Yeah, we'll stop shooting at you," and they wanted to get agreement that they could continue to go about contacting people, letting them know they're here. In the case of the ones that have incarnated, come in as humans, to let them know that they're not forgotten, and to kind of wake them up and remind them of their past and why they're here now. And in the case of genetic upgraded star kids and star seed adults, to interact with them and get them oriented to why they're here. The cabal infiltrated government representatives had something they wanted on their side, and they cut a pretty hard deal. They insisted that they be given advanced information on science, particularly in the arenas of energy, transportation, and biology. They wanted to get detailed information about the star visitors' craft, their UFOs, if you will, and their propulsion system. They wanted information about the energy signature of each of the star visitor races visiting Earth, because these cabal scientists had advanced abilities to detect differing energy patterns of different life forms, and wanted to be able to ID these people from a distance. We now know, well, I've been told by the star visitors, they now can do it from quite a distance and tell when a star visitor is within our atmosphere and on Earth. They wanted information about they wanted to restrict the altitudes UFOs could fly at unless they were on a pre-announced mission, and they wanted to be told by the star nations who the star nations were visiting, and they wanted to identify everyone who was an incarnate, been a star visitor in a previous existence and a human this time around, and all the ones who've been genetically upgraded. They want every one of those people ID'd. I can go into the reasons why they wanted that information and what use they made of it, but I imagine your imagination is already starting to run with this data.
Absolutely. Now, did the star nations approve that? Did they give them what the Earthlings wanted?
Yes, that was the price of the deal. And here is the thinking, the reasoning, the importance, because Earth was headed the way it has been going for destruction, self-destruction, both environmentally and socially, in terms of humankind's survivability. This became such an overarching, important priority that the star nations kind of held their nose and accepted very distasteful and unpleasant conditions as the price of being able to
help us
reach
out.
Earth and not get shot on the way down and not get interfered with when they wanted to make contact with people.
Now, Richard, how many meetings did they have then? We talked about 2. Did they have any more than that?
In terms of full meetings of everybody, there were the 2.
At what meeting did they basically ratify everything? The second?
The second meeting is where the agreement was ratified and brought to conclusion. When we were talking last time, we talked about the elements of the deal on both sides. I can speak about what happened after they went their separate ways in terms of following through on the agreement, which in some ways is the rest of the story. The Star Nations kept their side of the agreement. They're honorable people and operate from very high metaphysical and spiritual principles. The same cannot be said of the 4 governments involved. There have been firings on star visitor craft from time to time, and one of the counselors said to me that the humans say, well, it was a mistake or a misidentification or human error. We didn't mean to do it, but of course these happened and did. One of them was even captured by astronauts who were in orbit in a space shuttle, where a neutral particle beam weapon beam comes up from the Earth towards a star visitor craft that's hovering at the edge of atmosphere, and it makes a radical right turn at the last moment.
Yeah.
And
I think we've seen that video.
Yeah, a lot of people have seen that. That's just documentation that the deal was violated and that they've continued to fire on them. There, of course, have been various reports of downed UFOs since the 60s, and those were no accidents. It was deliberate shootings because these cabal-type folks want to grab these vehicles and tear them apart and back engineer them and find out what makes them tick and take that technology and reproduce it so that they can have advanced weapon systems to rule the world with. They've continued to ambush and kidnap and interrogate and torture star beings when they capture them from shot-down craft, or in some cases using energy signature detection, intercept them on the ground on the way to interact with a human. They've misused the flight altitude restrictions on Star Nations craft to continue the UFO cover-up for decades, and because the UFOs were generally required to fly very high in the sky, the government has says, well, all you saw up there was ice crystals or inversion layers or migratory geese. The technology and science information that the Star Nation shared was appropriated by Cabal scientists and taken to their labs and re-engineered into things like psychotronic mind-influencing weapons, using some of the advanced physics and energy information to create scalar energy artificial earthquake devices.
Richard, weren't we concerned that they were going to blow us up if we were trying to shoot down their craft? I mean, they must have had weaponry and technology far superior to ours.
Yes, but what the four governments came to understand is that the Star Nations are very strictly ethically bound by the 11 universal laws and the 11 spiritual laws of the cosmos. And these principles do not allow them to be anything but truthful and honorable, and when they give their word, they follow it through, and they're not going to get down in the gutter and play at the level of the Cabal just because that's the level the Cabal's playing at. And so there was a kind of a mismatch ethically between one side and the other in this. They went on to do things like misusing the genetic samples that these various Star Nation races had to give them to do gene splicing and cloning of hybrid human super soldier clones. My friend Dr. Michael Wolf, before his death, told me about that. He was in that project for a while before he figured out what the Army was really trying to do and washed his hands of it.
Yeah, it really plagued him, didn't it, once he found out what was happening?
Yeah, when people see that that recent movie out about clone super soldiers, that's Hollywood imitating reality. This project did take place. They've misused the information about which humans were being visited so that they could follow up on this whenever a star visitor visited a human with a rogue Cabal paramilitary unit that would kidnap these people, drug them, interrogate them, abuse them, and then hypnotize them to have a false memory that all the bad things that happened to them were done by evil aliens. So these people end up scratching their heads saying, I remember some good contacts, but it looks like something bad happened the other night, and it was really humans using drugs and hypnosis to mess their heads up so that they would begin to fear and avoid star visitor contact.
Now, the primary mission, Richard, by these Star Nations, of course, was what? One of being benevolent. They wanted to help planet Earth by genetically altering and also doing the reincarnation work. Well,
that's part of it. They see Earth itself as a living being, a somewhat sacred being, if you will, in the kind of Native American consciousness way, as a precious life form that cannot ethically be ignored or allowed to become trashed. Some of our own scientists, like James Loveland, are beginning to talk about the same thing, the Gaia theory that Earth is a conscious web of living systems that operates under a high unitary principle, and we are just part of that. That the Star Nations certainly share that kind of consciousness, and therefore, in their view, a planet is a terrible thing to waste, and didn't want to see Earth trashed by its allegedly intelligent inhabitants. But beyond that, they were concerned about all the other species, plants and animals, and uppermost humans, because we are highest in the intelligent and spiritual order.
At least we're supposed to be.
And supposed to be. And so their mission was to work with humans, to get humans mobilized, and they spent many of their communication hours with people on environmental lectures about, reversing the damage we're doing to the Earth. But also, in terms of human-to-human contact, that we need to change our priorities, not let materialism guide us, not being such a competitive, aggressive society, being more concerned about our fellow humans and not sitting by idly while people somewhere else in the world starve to death, that we, start to treat each other like family. And they wanted to help our society reach its potential as an intelligent, spiritual, high-minded, metaphysically aware, psychically endowed society operating at its highest and best potential. They have said that they've made a kind of special exception for Earth. They've seen many, many planetary civilizations over the history of the star nations, and Earth is at a very dire straits right now. And normally, when they see a society that's as taken over by the bad guys, the cabal, the shadow government, the New World Order, whatever you want to call it, as our Earth society is, where the bad guys have control of government, media, finances, all the basic power structures. They just say, well, it's too far gone, move on to something that can be saved. But they've made an exception because they see us at a very delicate teeter-totter and that there's potential to turn it around. That's why they've poured this effort in. And to kind of jump to something I've gotten as a kind of update since the original communication, they now believe that we can make it, that we will be able to correct the division in society between those who are ego-oriented and those who are oriented towards respect for Source, God, and, the sacred in nature, whatever you want to call it.
Hey, Richard, tell me about your clinical close encounter therapist group, because I think that's important to distinguish these other people who've been working with you on this project. Because, I've got a camp of people out here that think, oh, my God, this guy's off his rocker. I want you to elaborate a little bit more on the group and the telepathy that you say came to you.
Yeah. Well, the Academy of Clinical Close Encounter Therapists were not the group principally involved in this telepathic communication. It was another set of individuals that I've worked with on in the last year, and corroborated by my associate Marion McNeil and the star visitors she works with, and corroborated by Chief Golden Eagle, the keeper of the star traditions for the Yankton Sioux, Dakota Sioux. So I have multiple sources, if you will, that corroborate that this information is correct. It's not just a single source. But for those who are very materialistic and physical oriented and, don't believe anything unless they have some videotape, it's a little hard to videotape telepathic incoming communication.
Sure, but you can understand how people will hear this and go,
absolutely. And
what's wrong with this
a year
guy?
ago, if you told me I was going to be getting this kind of communication at this level of material, I'd have been dumbfounded and dubious myself. But you have to be inside it and start to get some corroboration. I've also had an Army intelligence retired officer tell me that I've got it right too. So I've got multiple sources that this stuff isn't just somebody had too many beans for dinner. But I can appreciate for people who are used to a very physical, scientific, in that quotation mark sense of the word, that this is a little hard for them to accept as an authentic stream of knowing. But it is here, and I think as people begin to see what's happening in our society over the time ahead, it will become more corroborated by the flow of events. I'd like to move a little ahead to a couple of important updates that have come in the last several days. A week ago, I got an update from the counselor for the Watchers, one of the principal Star Nation High Council spokespersons who presents this information, and he indicated that the Star Nations now view the 1964 agreement as invalid.
Why?
Well, I made the case that according to the international law, on three bases, that this agreement is invalid. The first basis is a doctrine called opto vires, meaning the people who entered into the agreement were not really legitimate. I argue that USSR and China were police states, and there were not free elections. That David Rockefeller was never elected and was not in a position to officially speak for the American people.
Well, why didn't they go straight to the United Nations, Richard?
Well, at this point, this was not anything more than a stopgap, an attempt to get a ceasefire, basically. And they needed to get more of the primary mission accomplished of reaching people and raising consciousness. They weren't ready to do the ta-da bit, land on the White House lawn, or show up at the UN for a formal worldwide meeting of cultures. They just wanted to get a ceasefire while they finished, over the last 42 years, they're getting enough of their primary mission done that there's a whole generation of conscious people rising up now and growing up among us. That was uppermost. So they just dealt with the four governments that were doing the shooting and cut a deal with them to get them to turn off the weapons so that they could get their mission accomplished. The other reasons are misunderstanding and fraud. If you enter agreement and you've got your fingers crossed, and it's very clear that as soon as the agreement is over, the governments, including the United States, continue to fire on vehicles when they felt like it. There's another international law, legal doctrine of peremptory norms, that an agreement's null and void if there's a violation of basic human right norms, and certainly intending to use the information on starseed incarnates and human star kids, starseed hybrids, to misuse that information to identify them, reach them, and terrorize them, and harm their rights, invalidates it. So on all these bases, they feel the agreement is invalid. And a fourth reason they gave is that the governments that cut the deal no longer exist. Mao's China is totally different now. The USSR is no more. The Council of Europe has been replaced by the European Union on a practical basis, and the era of Eisenhower and Lyndon Johnson's U.S. is a far cry from where we are today.
Well, if they're going to negate the agreement, though, Richard, what does this then mean for us? I mean, are they going to continue doing what they're doing, the genetic altering and the educating of those that they believe have already come here through reincarnation? Or are we in the midst of a war with them? What's going to happen?
No. There's a stopgap approach by the Star Nations, even though they now deem that the agreement is invalid. They're going to breach the gap by continuing to inform the major organizations about important information like their flight routes, so that there won't be a collision between a UFO and a human airplane or spacecraft. And they will continue other things like the defense of Earth and communication and information sharing. And the difference, however, is since a September 29th formal hearing where circumstances permitted a fresh hearing out of the evidence that the cabal, the shadow government, if you will, has been engaged in a long series of criminal and unethical behavior, the Star Nations have now reached the conclusion that they are ethically allowed to no longer deal with these people. Before that, they felt that they could not discriminate. All Earthlings had to be treated equally, but now, having found these to be career criminals, they are now feel they're ethically free to discriminate against them. They've cut off any further contact, no more communication, no more information sharing, and any government or organization that they normally communicate with, they say, you clean those people out before we talk to you.
Well, Richard, sounds like it could be war. We'll be back in a moment because I want to see if we as a world, continue to plan then to shoot down the craft. Richard, I am concerned, though, that if this is happening and if they have basically negated the deal, what's going to prohibit some of these world leaders to pull out their arsenal and start shooting again at these craft?
Well, they've been doing it intermittently all along, so I guess in some ways Star Nations would say, what else is new? But they're not disinterested in a vacuum here. They want to move ahead, and they have indicated that it's in their interest and in Earth's interest to move to a new understanding, a new agreement. They don't want a vacuum to last very long, and therefore, in the second update I've gotten from the Counselor for the Watchers, that they are now communicating directly with humans in various parts of the Earth in order to get ideas and feedback for what should go into a new agreement. They're going around existing governments because they have determined that all the major governments are pretty heavily infiltrated by cabal types. There aren't very many pure, very large governments out there. So they're going to go directly to the people in a grassroots way and make contact with a huge number of people, get their ideas and input into what they would like to see in an agreement between Star Nations and Earth, and put all that together and then come to a new agreement. And they've indicated that since they do a bit of future viewing, if you will, that they can see where this is headed, that in the future there will be teams formed of humans and star visitors that will deal with various areas, and they gave a couple examples actually. Teams would be for specific missions and objectives that are determined by the Star Nations and by the unified human race, species, if you will. For example, in the area of medical technology, this joint Star Nations human team would coordinate understanding of technology as shared by members of the Star Nations and ensure that medical technology advances are distributed fairly so that, the handful of big countries don't get them all, that the medical advances are spread around so that various areas of the world get a chance to develop these and market them, and so that we don't have the situation as we've had in the past where U.S. and U.K. and a couple of the other big players make all the advances and everybody else is shut out. Another example they've given of a joint Star Nations human team is, after this new understanding gets going, is they've heard already from many, many people that they want the healing of Earth to get accelerated. Things are so bad, they want this to be a great high urgency acceleration item. And the arrangement they have in mind is this, that as humans work to make needed changes to the environment to improve it, Star Nations will assist with energy work of their own. They call it energy stimulation. don't have a very good human level explanation for it. But it'll basically be on a matching level. If humans get busy on a certain area, particularly the Zetas, who are some of the real worker force of the Star Nations, will contribute energy so that there will be a multiplication of efforts, and the healing of Earth and its environmental systems will accelerate much more rapidly than if humans had to do all the reversing of the damage by themselves.
So we're going to get some help, you're saying?
Yes, that's after this new understanding gets solidified. We're going to see those kinds of joint effort teams. One of their ethical principles is that they can't ride in like the 7th Cavalry and solve all our problems for us. They could, but it wouldn't be right. It's our planet, our culture. We need to take ownership and responsibility of doing it right. On the other hand, we've got serious difficulties and time is running out. And so they see it as ethically possible to operate in a cooperative way with us while still giving us major responsibility, room to take major responsibility in straightening up our society and healing our planet.
Richard, do you see the future of this relationship with them and us as people as getting better and better?
Yes. For a while there, over the last year or two, the discussions that I was getting from council members there was a lot of back and forth about, the teeter-totter. But as more and more people start to make a difference in our society, and I think if you look around carefully, and the listeners look around carefully, they'll see that there are people stepping forward to make changes, to speak out against abuses and corruption and bad government and environmental destruction and violence and war and so forth. And they've determined that with some help and emphasis and push and communication and encouragement from them, we can turn this thing around in time. That we're not a lost cause. So they did a little future viewing, if you will. Military guys aren't the only people that do remote viewing.
All right, so they give you a little glimpse of the future for us?
Yeah, they see these teams deployed and cooperatively working on various areas. We mentioned medical technology advances and environmental improvement, and there's many other areas we could get into. But this is going to be the future. I proposed to them that what we needed is a central repository for information, that a lot of the information that they've shared with us has gotten bottled up by these cabal types, and it's been classified, and the public can't get at it and benefit from it.
Did they ever describe, Richard, what their craft looks like? I'm curious. With so many different star nations, I mean, are they all the same?
No. They have a great variety of craft. You've seen the disc and the cigar shapes and the triangles and things that look like a top or an ice cream cone, circular, rhomboid, rectangular. They come in an even kind of diffuse energy, which I'm not clear if that's an ambient plasma field or whether the craft itself is kind of diffuse energy. But they come in a huge variety, just as on Earth, not all our airplanes look the same.
What about the propulsion system for all the craft, even though they may look different? Is the propulsion system similar?
Well, I think there are some varieties because these are different civilizations doing their thing. Anti-gravity is certainly the bottom line, but there are kinds of anti-gravity. There's electrogravitic, magnetogravitic, and then a kind of working with the strong force field and manipulating that Bob Lazar has talked about. And different craft give off different kinds of effects and signatures. Some of them seem to have some magnetic effects on Earth. Some seem to send out electronic signals some seem to put out a bit of a heat signature. Some seem to affect the electronics on nearby planes that fly by them, and others don't. So, it seems that there's a variety of technologies that work, but the bottom line is they all keep the craft up in the air and it doesn't crash.
Why you, Richard? I mean, have you tried to answer that or resolve that for yourself? Why you, and how did this telepathic message come to you? I mean, did it just come in a dream? Did you get a funny feeling? What happened?
Well, I've been in dialogue with some people in a team that also worked on helping this hearing happen earlier that nailed the cabal for their misdeeds. So I've gotten a combination of telepathic messages from others and my own readings on that come together to put this message together, and I've gotten indications, as I say, from other associates and from Chief Golden Eagle as well, and the why me, I can't say in an absolutist sense. I do know that they've kind of tagged me as the representative for Earth to speak with their counselors, the High Council, if you will.
Well, you have not met them yet, though, have you?
Yes. I have met several of them.
Wait a minute. You're holding back on me now, Richard. When did this happen?
Well, I took a trip and was in their presence. They have not manifested in a physically separate way, but their energy field is there, and they've in some cases used a person to communicate through, use their voice box to communicate through. The thing here is that they said that Earth is about 2 ticks below the developmental level that they usually have as the minimum level of cultural and social development in a planetary society for them to bother with. We're about 2 ticks below that, but because there is a unique and kind of intriguing potential in humans, spiritual and even psychic giftedness, potentials, and enough intelligence that they felt that an exception would be made to the usual, well, pass them by and go on to some other planet that's worth saving that isn't so far gone. And so Earth has not been accepted into the Star Nation's family of inhabited worlds yet, designating a human representative. Myself at the moment, I hear that there are a couple of youngsters, a boy and a girl star kid, that are into their late grade school years and teens respectively that are going to be council representatives down the line. But at the moment, I'm the kind of designated hitter for this communication. But Earth is had to be talked to to get this ball rolling of turning things around and give us hope and give us an understanding of what had to happen in the past over 40 years ago to get enough of a path cleared to raise consciousness. We're at a whole different consciousness level on Earth now than we were in 1961. And now we're ready to engage with the Star Nations as visiting cultures. We've had enough of Star Trek and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and all of these presentations. Everybody's kind of gotten used to the fact that, in fact, some of our scientists now are talking about planets out there that look like they're the right size to harbor life, and finding organic molecules in the atmosphere and all the ingredients for life. The public consciousness has been softened up to the fact that the star visitors come out in public now. People aren't going to fall down and worship them as gods. They're not going to have any reason to fear them as invaders. They are going to understand that just as when we send explorers to visit a more primitive Indian tribe up the Amazon, they're still human beings. Cultures differ, but people can recognize basic humanity between each other and come to some understandings, and that when they come out in the open, we'll be able to engage on that level as well, with mutual respect and appreciation of intelligence and spirituality and develop consciousness between both societies.
Do you favor one Star Nation group over another? I mean, is there a one that you really take to your fancy?
You mean favorite race among them?
Yeah.
Well, that would be speaking to personal prejudice. I don't think there's any race that's intrinsically better than any other. They all subscribe to the 11 universal and 11 spiritual laws. I have kind of a special heart place for the praying mantis folks, having dealt with their energy, and in working with the people who've had that, they have a very high ethereal, spiritual, fine, gentle, warm, loving energy that I particularly cherish. But I could say good things about many of the other races I've heard about or had some contact with too. So I wouldn't want to play favorites here.
The praying mantis type.
Folks.
They were the praying mantis type. That was the ones that came off the craft in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Do you remember that scene?
Well,
kind of
those were kind
spindly.
Of Spielberg generics. They may have been an attempt to depict them.
And I'm talking about right in the beginning, not the small ones that came and got the occupants to go aboard.
Yeah,
But,
I suppose as much as Hollywood could do a job of it, you might say that, and they captured some of that ethereal, kind of glowing, gentle quality. I'll give you that, yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, Richard, it's fascinating stuff. It's bizarre. I've known you for a number of years. This has never happened to you until recently.
No.
Man, what do you tell people who say, Richard, I think we're going to cart you away now? I mean, what do you tell those people, the non-believers?
I'm a trained psychologist. I can write better admission orders than you can, but I have enough. I'm also a scientist, and I have enough independent corroboration. If we're just using the principles of jurisprudence and evidence, that you get multiple corroborating sources. Don't think that I don't pinch myself and have had questions about this, but when I get enough corroborating multiple sources, I have to say, well, we got something here. And I think the other half of it is going to be over the next several years. People are going to have to wait a little bit, but as they see things start to come out in the open and governments reluctantly admitting, yeah, they're here. Well, we've seen Guy Consolmagno do that for the Vatican in Harper's Monthly, this issue. We're going to see more governments doing that. And as we get an agreement, a new understanding going with the Star Nations, and they feel free and safe to come out in the open and start setting up these human Star Nation teams to take on different project areas and turn Earth around in a good direction, then I think it will speak for itself. Right now, I'm just a person talking, and people make of it whatever they will.
Well, you've got great credentials, Richard. I got to tell you, you're a scientist. It's an incredible story. You're an anthropologist, a PhD, behavioral scientist. I mean, this is amazing stuff. Richard, has this situation helped you or hurt you professionally? Behavioral scientist, anthropologist, you've got more titles than I can even announce. I mean, where does that stand for you?
You mean going public with this
Yes.
Star Nations information.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you, I've had a couple of repercussions since I've gotten this information and started putting it out. Very shortly after I got this information, my wife and I went on a little trip, and someone sabotaged one of the rear tires on our truck. So we were tooling along about 75 miles an hour on the interstate down in Southern California, out in the desert, and one tire was empty. Luckily, we had duals on the rear axle, and tire was totally shredded, but the other one held the weight, and we didn't careen off the highway into the side.
My God, Richard, you could have gotten killed if you had a single tire.
Yeah, definitely could have rolled. Then we've had some other stuff happen too, but that was the most dramatic. And of course, a lot of hate mail from the operatives who work for the cabal and don't want this out and do intimidation stuff. And some of my team colleagues, Frank and Wendy, Marja, have had similar stuff too. They use psychotronics and even kind of psychic outreach. Some of the stuff sounds pretty bizarre, but where a person can sit in one place and send negative energy that shows up somewhere else and disturbs the person, causes them discomfort or pain or all kinds of turbulent feelings, while they're asleep or awake. This stuff's been done to other members of the team, men in black kind of things, intimidation stuff. One person, their place of work has been staked out, and these guys very obviously make themselves known so that she's intimidated, or at least they're trying to get her intimidated. She's a pretty tough gal. But we understand that there's this thing has more importance than our personal comfort or even safety. The Earth and the human society literally hangs in the balance, and this word has to get out, and people are making the decisions to take the chances to get it out.
Again, thank you for being on Coast to Coast.
George,
Appreciate
you're
you
a
being
wonderful
on the
host
program.
as always. It's my pleasure.
All right, you go get some sleep.
Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy.